There is a mansion in central Pennsylvania that stands on a hill like a monument to a question money cannot answer. It rises above the town of Hershey, all limestone and colonial grandeur, surrounded by gardens that bloom with mathematical precision. 22 rooms, 11 bathrooms, a view that commands the valley below like a general surveying his army. The house was built by Milton Snavely Hershey, a man who transformed milk and sugar into an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a man whose name became synonymous with American chocolate, a man who had everything American capitalism promised. Except the one thing he built it all for. High Point Mansion was completed in 1908. By 1915, it had become a mausoleum, not officially. No one died within its walls. But something did die there, something harder to quantify than stock prices or factory output. This is not the story you learned in elementary school, where a kindly old man gave orphans a place to live. This is not the sanitized corporate biography printed on the back of candy bar wrappers. This is the story of how grief, channeled through the machinery of industrial capitalism, created one of the strangest philanthropic structures in American history. This is the story of what happens when a man tries to buy his way out of loneliness and discovers that some voids cannot be filled, only redirected. The mansion still stands today. Walk through the town of Hershey, past the chocolate factory that runs 24 hours a day, past the streetlights shaped like Hershey's Kisses, past the hotels and the amusement park, and you will see it, perched on its hill, watching, but you cannot go inside, not as a tourist. High Point is not a museum. It is the administrative headquarters of one of the wealthiest charitable trusts in the world, managing assets exceeding $20 billion. The house built for a childless couple now manages the lives of over 2,000 foster children annually. How did this happen? How does a personal tragedy transform into an institutional legacy that outlives its creator by nearly a century? To understand that, we must go back. Back to the mud and poverty. Back to the failures that preceded the fortune. Back to a love story that ended in a Philadelphia hotel room with the sound of breaking glass. If you value deep investigations into American industrial history, the invisible architecture of wealth, and the human contradictions buried beneath success narratives, please like this video and subscribe. Your support makes these detailed explorations possible. Now let us begin where all American fortunes begin, in the dirt among people who had nothing. 1. The education of failure. How poverty teaches. What Harvard cannot. September 13, 1857. Derry Church, Pennsylvania. A rural backwater where Mennonite farmers scratched subsistence from rocky soil. The kind of place where progress was viewed with suspicion and pleasure bordered on sin. This is where Milton Snavely Hershey entered the world. His parents were a study in incompatibility. Fanny Snavely Hershey came from a solid Mennonite family with land and Bible-hardened discipline. She believed in tangible things, property, work, scripture. Henry Hershey, Milton's father, was something else entirely. A dreamer, a schemer. A man perpetually convinced that the next venture would be the one that paid off. He planted fruit trees when the market wanted grain. He drilled for oil in places geologists laughed at. He moved the family constantly, fleeing debts and broken promises, like a man outrunning his shadow. Milton grew up in the crossfire between these worldviews. His mother demanded stability. His father preached risk. The family moved more than a dozen times before Milton reached adolescence. They lived in cramped farmhouses, rented rooms, borrowed spaces. The boy learned to pack quickly. He learned not to form attachments to places or things. He learned that security was an illusion maintained by people too afraid to dream. His formal education ended in the 4th grade. This matters. Milton Hershey, who would eventually employ thousands and manage complex international supply chains, could barely write a grammatically correct sentence. His spelling remained atrocious throughout his life. He never read philosophy or studied economics in any formal sense. His education came from watching his father fail and his mother suffer the consequences. At 14, Henry got him an apprenticeship at a print shop. The plan was for Milton to become a newspaper editor, a respectable profession for a bright boy. Milton hated it. The smell of ink nauseated him. The precision of typesetting felt like a cage. He rebelled in the most direct way possible. He deliberately dropped his hat into the printing press, jamming the expensive machinery. He was fired immediately. Fanny took control. She arranged an apprenticeship with Joseph Royer, a confectioner in Lancaster. Milton was sent to make candy. And here, among sugar and heat and the chemistry of crystallization, something clicked. This was a language he understood. Candy was alchemy. You took cheap ingredients, sugar, corn syrup, flavorings, and transformed them into something people craved. It was magic you could sell. He served his full 4-year apprenticeship. By 1876, at age 19, he was ready to strike out on his own. His timing seemed perfect. Philadelphia was hosting the Centennial Exposition, celebrating 100 years of American independence. The city swelled with tourists. Milton borrowed $150 from his aunt, Mattie Snavely, and opened a candy shop. He failed. Not slowly, not gracefully. He failed completely. He worked 18-hour days, making candy at night and selling it during the day. But he had no business sense. He extended credit to customers who never paid. He bought ingredients on terms he could not meet. His costs exceeded his revenue every single month. After 6 years of grinding poverty, sleeping in the back of his shop, eating scraps, he went bankrupt. The Snavely family was furious. Their money was gone. Milton had proven himself to be just another Henry Hershey, a dreamer who wasted other people's resources. He ran, first to Denver, Colorado, where his father was chasing silver mines. Milton got work with a local confectioner and learned something crucial. The man used fresh milk in his caramels. This was not common practice in the East, where milk spoiled quickly. But in Denver, with access to mountain dairies and cooler temperatures, fresh milk created a softer, longer-lasting product. Milton filed this information away. Emboldened, he tried again. Chicago, failure. New Orleans, failure. New York City, 1883. He borrowed money from anyone who would listen. He opened a candy production facility. He worked like a man possessed, but the universe seemed determined to teach him a lesson. His delivery wagon broke down during a heat wave. The sugar melted. Competitors undercut his prices. Creditors seized his equipment. At age 29, Milton Snavely Hershey returned to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, defeated. He looked like a vagrant. His clothes were threadbare. He had no money, no prospects, no credibility. Relatives crossed the street to avoid him. Even Fanny, his own mother, regarded him with something close to despair. He was the family embarrassment, another failed Hershey man. But something had changed inside him. The failures had burned away the romantic delusions his father had planted. Milton no longer believed in luck or shortcuts or easy victories. He believed in iteration, in trying again with lessons learned, in brutal, grinding persistence. He borrowed money from a former employee, a man named William Lebkitcher, who took pity on him. The amount was small, a few $100s. This was his last chance. If he failed again, there would be no more loans, no more family support. He would end up, like thousands of other failed businessmen, working manual labor until his body gave out. He rented a small workspace. He bought basic equipment. And he made caramels using the Denver method, fresh milk. He called them Lancaster caramels. He had no advertising budget, no connections, just a product that was measurably better than his competitors. An English importer tasted one, placed an order, a large order, larger than Milton could fulfill with his current setup. He took the order to a bank and asked for a loan against it. The banker thought he was insane. Milton Hershey, known failure, asking for credit based on a piece of paper from England. But the numbers were real. The banker, against his better judgment, approved the loan. Milton delivered the order. The payment cleared. And suddenly, after 13 years of failure, Milton Hershey had a functioning business. By the early 1890s, the Lancaster Caramel Company was producing caramels sold across the United States and Europe. His Crystal A caramels were premium products commanding premium prices. Milton Hershey, the man his family had written off, was now a millionaire. The exact net worth is difficult to pinpoint, but by 1893 he was comfortably wealthy by any standard of the era. He had won. He had proven everyone wrong. He had a successful business, social respect, and financial security. He could have stopped, built a nice house, married well, lived comfortably. But Milton Hershey had learned something from his father after all, something he did not fully recognize: the inability to be satisfied. In 1893, he attended the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. In the German pavilion, he saw chocolate-making machinery, large industrial equipment capable of mass production. Chocolate at that time was a luxury product, European, expensive, controlled by Swiss and Belgian manufacturers who guarded their processes. The average American worker could not afford chocolate. It was a treat for the wealthy. Milton watched the dark, viscous chocolate flowing from the machines, and he made a decision that his business partners thought was suicidal. Caramel is just a fad, he told them. Chocolate is forever. He bought the German equipment, shipped it to Pennsylvania, and began experimenting. His goal was not to make better European-style chocolate. His goal was to make chocolate the average American could afford, to democratize luxury through industrial efficiency. This was not altruism. This was capitalism. There were millions of potential customers who could not access the product. If he could produce chocolate cheaply enough, he could tap an enormous market. But there was a technical problem. European chocolate used expensive cocoa butter and processing methods that required skilled labor. Milton needed a formula that could be mass-produced by factory workers. He spent years experimenting, hundreds of batches, different ratios of milk, sugar, cocoa, different processing temperatures and times. His partners grew impatient. The caramel business was printing money. Why waste time and resources on chocolate? But Milton was obsessed. He had found his white whale. And then he found something else, something that made the obsession make sense. In 1898, in a confectionery shop in Jamestown, New York, he met Catherine Sweeney. 2. The Irish Girl and the Mennonite Millionaire, a marriage that should not have existed. Catherine Sweeney was everything Milton Hershey was not supposed to want. She was Irish, Catholic, the daughter of working-class immigrants. She worked in a candy shop, serving customers. In the rigid social hierarchy of late 19th century America, the gulf between a Protestant industrial millionaire and a Catholic shopgirl was not just wide, it was unbridgeable. But Milton Hershey, who had spent his life being told what he could not do, did not care about social hierarchies, or perhaps he cared deeply and took pleasure in defying them. Catherine, who went by Kitty, was 26, red hair, quick laugh, comfortable in her own skin in a way that Milton, buttoned up and socially awkward, could never be. They courted briefly, secretly. Milton's mother, Fanny, would have disapproved violently. A Catholic wife? Unthinkable. The Mennonite community would have been scandalized. But Milton, for perhaps the first time in his life, chose emotion over calculation. May 25, 1898. St. Patrick's Cathedral, New York City. Not the main cathedral, but the rectory. A quiet ceremony. No reporters, no family, just the two of them and a priest. Milton Snavely Hershey, age 40, married Catherine Sweeney. It was an act of rebellion disguised as a wedding. The transformation was immediate. People who had known Milton for years remarked on it. The dour, workaholic bachelor started smiling. He updated his wardrobe. He began spending money on things other than equipment and raw materials. He took Kitty to theaters, to restaurants, on trips. She opened a door in him that decades of business success had not touched. And it was Kitty, more than any business calculation, who pushed Milton toward his greatest decision. He was wealthy from caramels. But wealthy men were common. Kitty made him want to be more, to build something that would impress not just balance sheets, but the world. She had seen Europe. She talked about the grand estates, the gardens, the culture. Milton listened, and he calculated. August 10th, 1900. Milton Hershey committed an act that Wall Street considered insane. He sold the Lancaster Caramel Company to the American Caramel Company for $1 million. In 1900, currency, approximately $30 million today. His competitors celebrated. They thought they had eliminated a rival. They thought Milton would retire, enjoy his wealth, fade into comfortable obscurity. They were wrong. Milton had retained one right in the sale contract, the right to manufacture chocolate. The caramel company was sold. The chocolate. Experiments were not. He had shed a profitable business to go all in on an unproven product. His reasoning was cold and economic. Caramel is a fad, chocolate is permanent, people will always want chocolate. But there was more to it than economics. Kitty wanted something grand. Milton wanted to give it to her, and he wanted to do it in a way that would prove, once and for all, that the poor Mennonite boy from Derry Church could build something that rivaled anything in Europe. He returned to the place he had fled, Derry Church, the backwater where his childhood had been shaped by poverty and his father's failures. But now he saw it differently, not as a prison, as an opportunity. The land was cheap. There were dairy farms everywhere, providing the fresh milk his chocolate formula required. There was water from the nearby spring. There was space. In 1903, construction began, not just of a factory, of a town. Milton Hershey had studied the industrial slums of England and hated them. He had seen how companies treated workers as disposable components. He decided his workers would live in brick houses with lawns. They would have schools, parks, public transportation. This was not pure altruism. Happy workers were productive workers. Low turnover saved training costs. But the scale of his vision went beyond narrow profit calculation. He was building a utopia, a chocolate utopia. And at the center of it, on the highest point overlooking the factory and the town, would be a mansion. For Kitty. The house was designed by C. Emlyn Urban, a prominent architect. Milton's instructions were clear: elegance, modernity, and a view. The location was chosen with precision. High Point, the highest elevation for miles. From the veranda, Milton would be able to see his factory, his town, his empire. Everything he had built would be visible in a single panoramic sweep. Construction took years. While the walls of High Point rose, the Hershey Chocolate Company began production. The formula Milton had perfected was simple: milk chocolate, mass-produced, affordable. A Hershey bar cost 5 cents. The average worker earned about 20 cents per hour, meaning a chocolate bar cost roughly 15 minutes of labor. For the first time in American history, chocolate was not a luxury. It was an everyday pleasure within reach of ordinary people. The product was revolutionary. Sales exploded. By 1905, the factory was running multiple shifts. By 1906, Hershey's chocolate was being sold nationwide. Money poured in faster than Milton could reinvest it. The factory expanded. The town grew, and High Point neared completion. But while Milton was building his empire and his mansion, something was happening to Kitty, something neither money nor architecture could fix. She grew tired easily. Her hands trembled. She lost her balance on flat ground. At first, these symptoms were dismissed. Stress, adjustment to the new climate, the exhaustion of moving. But the symptoms did not go away. They worsened. Doctors were consulted, the best Philadelphia could offer. The diagnosis was vague, as diagnoses often were in the early 20th century. Nervous exhaustion, ataxia, neurasthenia. The words changed, but the meaning was the same. Something was destroying her nervous system, and there was no cure. Milton threw money at the problem. More doctors, specialists, trips to European sanatoriums, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. Kitty continued to decline, slowly, inexorably. In 1908, High Point was completed. 22 rooms, limestone facade, colonial revival architecture, modern plumbing and electrical systems, rare luxuries at the time. The total cost was approximately $100,000, roughly $3 million today, for a single house. Milton and Kitty moved in. The dream was supposed to begin. They had wealth, status, a magnificent home. They had won. But the house was too quiet. The rooms designed for children's laughter echoed with silence. Kitty's condition made pregnancy impossible. The nurseries remained empty. The future they had imagined dissolved like sugar in water. 3. The architecture of control. What High Point reveals about power and loneliness. To understand High Point is to understand the psychology of a man who believed problems could be solved through engineering. Walk through the front door. The first thing you notice is light. Unlike the heavy, compartmentalized Victorian mansions of the era, High Point has an open floor plan. The entrance hall flows into the living room, which flows into the dining room. No walls separating the spaces. This was unusual for 1908. It was a deliberate choice. Milton Hershey grew up in cramped, dark rooms filled with the smell of failure and fear. High Point was the opposite: space, air, light. The walls were pushed back. You could see from one end of the first floor to the other. It was an architectural rejection of his childhood. The materials were chosen for permanence, oak paneling, chestnut trim, marble fireplaces. These were not fashionable materials. They were materials that would outlast trends. Milton was building something that would endure, not just for his lifetime, but for generations. Except there would be no generations, not his own. The furniture was purchased during trips to Europe with Kitty. English antiques, French art, Italian sculptures. Every piece had a story. Every object was a memory of a place they had traveled together, searching for doctors who might cure her. The house became a museum of their marriage, a physical manifestation of love expressed through acquisition. The second floor held the private quarters, Kitty's bedroom, Milton's bedroom, separate rooms, as was common for wealthy couples of that era. But there was another reason. Kitty's illness caused her pain. She needed quiet, darkness. Milton's work schedule meant he was often awake at odd hours, reviewing reports, making decisions. Separate bedrooms were practical, but they were also symbolic. Distance growing where intimacy should have been. The most telling room was the conservatory, sometimes called the palm room. Glass walls, exotic plants, wicker furniture. This was Kitty's space. She spent hours here, looking out at the gardens Milton had built for her. Rose gardens, formal European-style landscaping. Every day, regardless of weather, gardeners would cut fresh roses and bring them to her. Dozens of roses, filling the house with their scent, an attempt to mask the smell of illness with the perfume of life. But High Point had a fundamental design flaw. It was built for a life that never happened. The dining room could seat 20. It rarely had more than 2. The billiard room waited for gatherings of men smoking cigars and discussing business. Those gatherings rarely occurred. The nurseries remained empty, their intended purpose unfulfilled. The house was a stage set for a play that was never performed. Servants who worked at High Point later recalled an atmosphere of silence. Thick Persian rugs absorbed the sound of footsteps. Conversations were conducted in low voices. Any sharp noise could trigger Kitty's migraines or nervous episodes. The house became an isolator, a beautiful, expensive isolator, and from every window on the south side, Milton could see his factory, the chimneys, the smoke, the railroad tracks carrying raw materials in and finished products out. High Point was not just a home. It was a command post. Milton's office in the house was positioned so he could watch the factory while he worked. Even at home, he was at work. The boundary between the two dissolved. This was the paradox of High Point. It was built as a sanctuary from the world, but it was architecturally designed to maintain connection to Milton's empire. He could never fully retreat. The factory was always visible, always smoking, always demanding attention. Kitty's decline continued. By 1910, she could barely walk. By 1912, she required assistance for basic tasks. Milton hired nurses. He installed medical equipment. He converted parts of the house into a private hospital. But no amount of money changed the trajectory. Her nervous system was failing. The pain was constant. And during this period, Milton made a decision that would define his legacy more than any chocolate bar. If he could not have his own children, he would become a father to others. 4. The school that replaced an heir. How grief creates institutions. November 15, 1909. A document is signed. Milton and Kitty Hershey established the Hershey Industrial School. The name is important, not the Hershey School for Orphans, not the Hershey Charity School, the Hershey Industrial School, industrial, productive. The boys sent here would not be coddled. They would be trained, educated, turned into useful citizens. The initial enrollment was 4 boys. 4. They lived not in a grand building, but in the old homestead, the farmhouse where Milton himself had been born. The symbolism was intentional. These boys, like Milton, started from nothing. They would be given what he had fought for: education, structure, opportunity. But beneath the altruism was a darker current. Kitty's infertility had created a void, an absence of heirs, an empire with no succession plan. The school filled that void. Milton became a father to dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of boys. He was the voice of authority, the provider, the disciplinarian. He built a family in the image of a factory, efficient, structured, regulated. The timing matters. The school was established in 1909, 6 years before Kitty's death. This was not a memorial. This was Kitty's idea. She understood she would never be a mother. She asked Milton to let them care for other children. It was an act of sublimation, redirecting maternal instinct into institutional form. But the school also served a practical function. Milton was building a company town. Thousands of workers were moving to Hershey, Pennsylvania, attracted by factory jobs. These workers brought children. The town needed schools, infrastructure, services. By creating a boarding school for orphans, Milton was simultaneously performing charity and solving a civic problem. The boys would be educated to work in his factories, his farms, his businesses. It was philanthropy engineered to produce a return. And then, in April 1912, came the moment that reinforced Milton's belief in fate. He and Kitty were in Europe. Kitty was seeking treatment in the warmer climate of the French Riviera. It was time to return to America. Milton booked passage on the newest, most luxurious ocean liner in the world. He wrote a check for $300, a deposit on a VIP suite. The ship's name, Titanic. The tickets were in hand. The departure date was set, but Kitty's condition deteriorated sharply. She became too ill to wait. They could not delay until the Titanic's departure. Milton changed their tickets. They sailed 3 days earlier on the German liner America. April 14, 1912. The America was approaching New York Harbor. In the middle of the Atlantic, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank. Over 1,500 people died. Milton and Kitty learned about it after landing. The check Milton had written for the Titanic deposit was never cashed. It remained in the archives of the White Star Line, a paper monument to chance. Milton was a practical man, not religious in any conventional sense, but this incident affected him. He had been spared. Why? For what purpose? He began to see his life through a providential lens. He had survived to complete a mission, to build something, to do something. But what? The answer became clear as Kitty's condition worsened. He had been spared to take care of those who had no one else, the orphans, the vulnerable, the boys who, like him, started with nothing. From 1912 to 1915, Kitty's decline accelerated. She could no longer leave High Point. The grand house became a prison. Doctors came and went. Treatments were tried and abandoned. Milton sat by her bedside, reading to her, holding her hand, the most powerful man in Pennsylvania, helpless. The factory below the hill ran without pause. Production increased. Profits soared. World War I created demand for shelf-stable, high-calorie foods. Chocolate bars were shipped to soldiers. The Hershey Company became an essential part of the American war effort. Milton's wealth grew exponentially. But in the mansion on the hill, none of that mattered. Kitty was dying, slowly, painfully, and there was nothing Milton could do except watch. By early 1915, doctors recommended moving her to Philadelphia. The winter in Hershey was too harsh. The city had better medical facilities. It was a last-ditch effort. Everyone knew it, but Milton clung to any possibility. He rented a suite at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, one of Philadelphia's finest. Kitty was moved there. The house at High Point was closed. Servants covered the furniture with sheets. The gardens, even in winter, were maintained. Milton believed Kitty would return in the spring. He had to believe it. March 25, 1915. 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Kitty's breathing had become labored. The doctors stood in the corner, their faces saying what their words did not. Milton sat beside her. She opened her eyes. Her voice was barely audible. She asked for champagne. A strange request. An inappropriate request for a dying woman. But Milton moved instantly. He would have bought her a vineyard if she asked. He left the room, shouting orders to the hotel staff. Within minutes, he returned, a fogged glass in his hand, champagne bubbling. He entered the room and found silence. Her breathing had stopped. The doctors had lowered their heads. Kitty Hershey was dead at age 42. The glass slipped from Milton's fingers. Crystals shattered on the parquet floor. Champagne spread across the expensive carpet. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot in a church. Milton did not cry. Not there, not in front of others. He simply stood, looking at the body of the only person he had ever loved. In his pocket were tickets for a cruise they had planned, tickets that were now garbage. Kitty's body was placed in a coffin and sent by train back to Hershey. Milton followed. He returned to High Point and gave an order. Nothing in Kitty's rooms was to be changed. Not a single thing. Her dresses remained in the closets, her hairbrush on the vanity, her perfume bottles arranged exactly as she had left them. Every day, fresh roses were placed in her bedroom, as if she had just stepped out and would return at any moment. This was not grief. This was pathological denial, and it lasted for years. 5. The gift that destroyed ownership. How one man gave away an empire. The years following Kitty's death are a study in controlled disintegration. Milton Hershey did not collapse. He continued to run his company. He expanded production. He made rational business decisions. But something inside him had broken. The man who had built an empire to impress his wife no longer had a reason to build. The silence at High Point became unbearable. 22 rooms designed for life now amplified loneliness. Milton began sleeping in a small apartment above the Hershey Community Club rather than in his mansion. He could not bear the emptiness. The house stood on the hill, maintained by servants, filled with Kitty's possessions. A museum to a marriage. And then, in 1918, Milton made a decision that has puzzled business historians ever since. November 13th, 1918, 2 days after the end of World War I. While the world celebrated peace, Milton summoned his lawyers. The meeting was secret. No press, no public announcement. On the table was a legal document, a deed of transfer. Milton Hershey transferred the entire controlling interest of the Hershey Chocolate Company to the trust fund of the Hershey Industrial School. Not a portion, not a percentage. The entire common stock, the estimated value, was $60 million, roughly equivalent to over $1 billion today. But the raw number misses the point. He gave away control, ownership, legal authority. From that moment forward, Milton Hershey, the founder of the company, was technically an employee. The school, an institution for orphan boys, owned the corporation. Every dollar of profit would flow to the trust. Every business decision would be made in service of the school's mission. He had turned capitalism inside out. Why? The official explanation is altruism. Milton had no heirs. The school became his legacy. But the deeper truth is more complicated. Milton was a product of his era's social Darwinism. He believed in hard work, meritocracy, and earned success. But he also believed that concentrated wealth without purpose was poison. He had seen what happened to the children of the ultra-wealthy. They became idle, corrupt, useless. By giving his fortune to the school, he created a machine that would produce useful citizens in perpetuity. Boys who started with nothing would be given education, training, and opportunity. They would earn their place in the world. They would not inherit wealth. They would inherit a chance. But there was also a personal motivation. Milton could not save Kitty. He could not have his own children, but he could, through institutional structure, become a father to thousands. The school was not just charity. It was reincarnation through bureaucracy. His values, his philosophy, his vision would live on through every boy who graduated. The world did not learn about this transfer for 5 years. It was discovered in 1923 by a journalist who noticed discrepancies in corporate filings. When confronted, Milton confirmed it. His explanation was characteristically blunt. I have no heirs. The boys are my heirs. Wall Street was stunned. Analysts could not comprehend it. A man voluntarily giving away control of a profitable corporation? It violated every principle of capitalist logic. But Milton had created something far more powerful than a corporation. He had created a structure that could not be destroyed by greed. Throughout the 20th century, corporate raiders attempted to acquire Hershey. They offered enormous sums, billions of dollars in modern terms, but every attempt failed. The trust that owned the controlling stock had a fiduciary duty to serve the school, not shareholders, not profit maximization. The school. And the terms of the trust, written by Milton's lawyers, were nearly impossible to break. Milton Hershey, dead since 1945, still controlled his empire from beyond the grave. His will, his legal structure, his vision had become a force more powerful than any individual successor could have been. 6. The mansion that became a monument. High Point in the modern era today. If you visit Hershey, Pennsylvania, you can see High Point. It stands on its hill, exactly as it did in 1908. The limestone facade is intact. The gardens are maintained with the same precision Milton demanded. But you cannot go inside. Not as a tourist. High Point is now the headquarters of the Hershey Trust Company, one of the wealthiest charitable trusts in the world. The assets under management exceed $20 billion. That is more than the endowments of many Ivy League universities, more than the GDP of some small nations. And all of it serves a single purpose, providing for orphaned and underprivileged children. The irony is almost too perfect. A house built for a couple who could not have children now manages resources that support over 2,000 foster children annually. Kitty's bedroom, where she suffered and died, is now an office. Milton's study, where he signed away his fortune, is where trust administrators make decisions affecting lives across the state of Pennsylvania. The house was never meant to be an office. The transformation is awkward. Desks occupy spaces. Designed for intimacy. Conference rooms fill areas meant for family dinners. But the structure endures. High Point was built to last. Milton chose materials that would outlive trends, outlive fashions, outlive him. The Hershey School itself has expanded far beyond the 4 boys who lived in the homestead in 1909. Today, it enrolls over 2,000 students. They live on a campus spanning 10,000 acres. They receive free education, housing, medical care, and college preparation. The school's endowment, funded by Hershey Company profits, ensures it can continue in perpetuity. This is Milton Hershey's true legacy. Not the chocolate bars, not the theme park, not the town with streetlights shaped like kisses. The legacy is a machine that converts corporate profits into human potential, a perpetual motion device of opportunity. But was it worth it? This is the question that haunts High Point. Milton Hershey died in 1945, age 88. He spent the last 30 years of his life alone. He never remarried. He lived in modest quarters, not in his mansion. He worked until the end, monitoring his company, his school, his town. He was revered, respected, even loved by many. But he was alone. Did the thousands of boys who received an education because of his gift compensate for the absence of his own children? Did the perpetuation of his vision through institutional structure replace the warmth of family? These are not questions economics can answer. What we know is this: Milton Hershey chose legacy over comfort. He chose structure over spontaneity. He chose the eternal over the ephemeral. Whether that choice was noble or tragic depends on what you value. If you measure a life by its impact, by the number of people helped, by the systems created, then Milton Hershey succeeded beyond measure. If you measure a life by personal happiness, by intimate connections, by the warmth of a home filled with laughter, then High Point stands as a monument to failure. The mansion does not care about these philosophical debates. It stands, it serves, it endures. 7. What chocolate can and cannot buy: the economics of grief. Let us talk about money, real money, specific amounts. Because the story of Milton Hershey is, at its core, a story about capital and what it can accomplish. When Milton sold the Lancaster Caramel Company in 1900, he received $1 million. Adjusted for inflation, approximately $30 million today. But inflation adjustment misses the comparative economic reality. In 1900, the average worker earned roughly $450 per year. Milton's sale price represented 2,222 years of average labor. That is the real measure of wealth. He invested almost all of it in chocolate production and town construction. The Hershey factory, completed in 1905, cost approximately $150,000. The town infrastructure, houses, roads, utilities, cost millions more. High Point cost $100,000. By 1910, Milton's net worth was estimated at $20 million. By 1915, $40 million. By his death in 1945, over $60 million. Always in period-appropriate currency. The modern equivalent is measured in billions. But here is the crucial point. After 1918, none of it was his. Legally, he owned nothing. The controlling stock was held by the trust. He drew a salary. He lived modestly. He could have bought anything, but he chose to buy almost nothing. This is the central paradox. Milton Hershey proved that money could buy everything capitalism promises: factories, infrastructure, political influence, social status. But it could not buy the two things he wanted most: Kitty's health and biological children. When money failed to deliver, he rejected its logic. He gave it away, not recklessly, strategically. He engineered a system where money would serve a purpose beyond accumulation. The Hershey Company generated enormous profits throughout the 20th century. All of those profits flowed to the trust. The trust funded the school. The school produced graduates who became productive citizens. Many of those graduates returned to work for Hershey, creating a closed loop of economic and social capital. Milton had built a perpetual motion machine of philanthropy powered by chocolate. But this system had critics. Some argued that concentrating so much wealth in a single institution created dangerous power imbalances. The Hershey Trust was, and is, the dominant economic and political force in Derry Township. It owns vast tracts of land. It controls the school, which has an enormous campus. It has veto power over major economic development. Critics called it benevolent feudalism. Milton Hershey as an eternal absentee lord, ruling through legal structures rather than direct authority. Others argued that the trust's fiduciary duty to the school created perverse incentives. The trust must maximize returns to fund the school. This means Hershey Company must prioritize profit over ethics, over workers, over community. The very altruism of the mission could justify ruthless business practices. These criticisms are not without merit, but they also miss something. Milton Hershey created a structure that has survived over a century of economic upheaval, market crashes, wars, and technological revolutions. The school still operates. The company still produces chocolate. The town still exists. How many businesses from 1905 can make that claim? How many philanthropic institutions founded in 1909 still serve their original mission? Durability has value. Institutional permanence has value. Milton Hershey understood something that modern capitalism often forgets. Short-term profit maximization destroys long-term stability. He built for centuries, not quarters. 8. The roses that never stop. Symbols, rituals, and the performance of memory. After Kitty's death, Milton established a ritual. Every day, fresh roses were to be placed in her bedroom at high point. Every single day, regardless of season, regardless of whether anyone would see them. The gardeners complied. They maintained the greenhouses. They grew roses year-round. They cut the best blooms and brought them to an empty room in a mansion no one lived in. This ritual continued for years, long after any rational person would have stopped. The roses were not for Kitty. She was dead. The roses were for Milton. They were a performance of fidelity, a daily act of remembrance, a way to structure grief into routine. But the ritual also reveals something darker. Milton could not let go. He could not accept that Kitty was gone. The roses were an attempt to keep her alive through symbolic gesture. If the ritual was maintained, then some part of her remained. If he stopped, then she would truly be dead. This is the danger of institutional memory. Rituals can become prisons. Milton Hershey built institutions, the school, the company, the town, as monuments to his values. But institutions, once established, develop their own logic. They resist change. They prioritize self-preservation. The mission becomes secondary to survival. The Hershey School today is not the same institution Milton founded. It has evolved, adapted, changed policies, curricula, admission standards. But it still carries his name. It still operates on land he owned. It still uses wealth he generated. The dead hand of the founder shapes decisions made by people born decades after his death. Is this good? Is this what Milton intended? These questions have no clear answers. What we know is that Milton Hershey believed in legacy. He believed that what a man built should outlast him. He believed that values could be encoded into structures. And he was right. His values have outlasted him. But so have the contradictions. The roses eventually stopped. No record indicates exactly when. Perhaps after Milton's death in 1945. Perhaps earlier. The ritual ended not because someone decided it was foolish, but because the institutional logic shifted. High Point became offices. Offices do not need roses in empty bedrooms. Efficiency replaced sentiment. But the gardens Milton built still bloom. The Hershey Gardens, established in 1937, now cover 23 acres. They include a rose garden with over 6,000 rose bushes representing more than 250 varieties. Tourists visit by the thousands. They take photographs. They admire the flowers. Few know that the gardens began as a gift from a grieving husband to a dying wife. This is how legacy works. The original context fades. The symbols remain. The roses that once meant, "I love you and I cannot let you go," now mean, "Come visit Hershey and enjoy the flowers." Meaning transforms with time. But the structures endure. 9. The final accounting, what we owe to the dead. Milton Hershey died on October 13, 1945. He was 88 years old. He died not in High Point, but in the Hershey Hospital, an institution he had funded. His funeral was attended by thousands, workers from the factory, students from the school, townspeople whose homes he had built. He was mourned publicly, celebrated, eulogized as a great man. But in his pocket, when he died, was a photograph of Kitty. Just one photograph, worn from being carried for 30 years. That was what he had of her, not the mansion, not the gardens. A photograph. The reading of his will was anticlimactic. He had already given away everything that mattered. The trust owned the company. The school owned the trust. There were minor bequests to employees, to relatives. But the bulk of his estate was already distributed. He had died, in legal terms, with very little. But in practical terms, he controlled billions through the structures he had created. This raises a question. What do we owe to the dead? Milton Hershey's will, his legal structures, his institutional vision still govern decisions today. The Hershey Trust Company manages assets according to rules he established over a century ago. The school admits students based on criteria he defined. The company produces chocolate using formulas he developed. He is dead, but his authority persists. Is this right? Should the dead have veto power over the living? Or is this the only way to ensure that long-term missions survive short-term pressures? These are not abstract questions. They have real consequences. In 2002, the Hershey Trust announced plans to sell the Hershey Company to the highest bidder. The reasoning was fiduciary responsibility. The trust needed to diversify assets to protect the school's endowment. A sale would generate billions. The public reaction was explosive. Workers protested. Community members rallied. The Pennsylvania Attorney General intervened. The sale was blocked. The argument was that selling the company would violate Milton Hershey's intent. He had created the company to fund the school and provide jobs in Hershey. Selling it would destroy both missions. The sale did not happen. The company remained under trust control. But the episode revealed the tension inherent in Milton's system. The legal obligation to maximize returns conflicted with the moral obligation to preserve his vision. Which takes priority? The law says fiduciary duty. The public says historical intent. There is no clear answer. Milton Hershey built something that cannot be easily classified. Not quite a business, not quite a charity. A hybrid structure where profit serves mission and mission justifies profit. It is a form of economic organization that defies standard categories. And it works, imperfectly, with contradictions, but it works. 10. The Mansion on the Hill. What High Point teaches about American wealth stand at the base of High Point Hill today. Look up. The mansion is still there, unchanged, a colonial revival structure in a world of glass and steel. It does not fit the modern aesthetic. It belongs to a different era. but it endures. This is what American wealth does. It builds monuments, houses that are too large, estates that are too grand, structures that proclaim, "I have won." High Point was Milton's victory monument, proof that the poor boy from Derry Church had conquered the world. But the monument outlasted its purpose. Milton built it for Kitty, and Kitty died. He built it for his heirs, and he had no heirs. He built it to be a home, and it became an office. The structure remained, but the meaning changed. This is the fate of all monuments. They survive their creators and are repurposed by those who come after. High Point teaches us that wealth is a storytelling device. The mansion tells a story: success, love, loss, legacy. But the story changes depending on who is telling it. To Milton, it was the story of his love for Kitty. To the students of the Hershey School, it is the story of the benefactor who provided for them. To tourists, it is a piece of local history. To the trust administrators who work there, it is just an office that happens to have nice architecture. All of these interpretations are true, and none of them capture the whole truth, because the truth is that High Point is not a symbol. It is a building. Limestone and wood and glass. It exists in physical space, independent of the meanings we assign to it. And it will continue to exist long after everyone who remembers Milton Hershey is dead. This is the final lesson of High Point. Buildings outlast people. Institutions outlast intentions. Structures endure while meanings fade. Milton Hershey built something that will survive him by centuries. But what it becomes, what it means, what it serves, that is determined by those who come after. He set the trajectory, but he cannot control the destination. Conclusion: the price of forever. This is where the story ends, or rather, where it continues without us, because the story of Milton Hershey is still being written. Every child who attends the Milton Hershey School is a new chapter. Every Hershey bar sold is a footnote. Every administrative decision made in the offices of High Point is a revision. Milton Hershey spent his life building things that would last forever. A company, a town, a school, a mansion. He succeeded. They have lasted. But forever comes with a price. The price is that you lose control. You build a machine, and the machine develops its own logic. You create an institution, and the institution develops its own interests. You enshrine your values in legal structures, and lawyers argue about what you really meant. Milton wanted to create a legacy. He did. But the legacy is not what he imagined. He imagined grateful orphans living lives he made possible. And that happens. But the legacy is also trust administrators managing investments, corporate executives balancing profit and mission, community members fighting to preserve jobs, lawyers debating the interpretation of century-old documents. This is the messy, complicated, contradictory reality of long-term impact. Was it worth it? Did Milton Hershey's life achieve its purpose? If the purpose was to build something larger than himself, then yes, absolutely. The scale of his impact is undeniable. If the purpose was to find personal happiness, then no. He spent 30 years alone in a mansion built for a family he never had. But perhaps these are the wrong questions. Perhaps the point is not whether it was worth it, but that he tried. He took the grief of losing Kitty and the emptiness of childlessness and channeled it into something productive. He could have become bitter. He could have hoarded his wealth. He could have retreated from the world. Instead, he built. High Point stands on its hill. The factory below still smokes. The gardens still bloom. The school still educates. The chocolate still sells. And somewhere in a legal document filed in a Pennsylvania courthouse, Milton Hershey's will continues to exert force on the living world. This is what money can buy if you are willing to give it away, a kind of immortality, not personal immortality, institutional immortality. the immortality of structures that carry your name and your vision long after your body has turned to dust. The mansion is lonely. It has always been lonely. 22 rooms built for a life that never happened. But loneliness, properly channeled, can build empires. Grief, properly engineered, can feed thousands. And love, even love that ends in a Philadelphia hotel room with the sound of breaking glass, can echo through generations. Milton Hershey's story is not a fairy tale. It is not a simple narrative of rags to riches. It is a complicated, messy human story about what happens when you have everything money can buy and discover it is not enough. About the choices you make when the person you built everything for is gone. About whether it is possible to find meaning in institutions when you could not find it in intimacy. The answer, like the mansion on the hill, is still standing. Unchanged, enduring, waiting for the next person to walk through its doors and assign it a new meaning. This is the nature of legacy. You build it, you give it away, and then you hope. You've seen the mansion, you've seen the death, you've seen the transfer of capital that created the world's strangest business model. But there's a deeper story here that most documentaries skip over entirely. A story not of generosity, but of control. Of how Milton Hershey's trauma didn't just create a school, it created a total system. A benevolent dictatorship written into the DNA of a corporation that still exists, still operates, and still struggles with the fundamental contradictions its founder built into its foundation. The question nobody asks is this: what happens when you try to run a modern Fortune 500 company according to the wishes of a dead man who made his decisions in 1918? When the ghost has voting rights? When chocolate profits must answer to children who have no choice in the matter? This is the machinery behind the myth. The gears nobody shows you. Let's talk about what Milton actually created when he signed that deed in 1918. The Milton Hershey School was designed from the ground up as a social engineering experiment, not in the sinister sense, but in the Victorian sense. Milton believed, genuinely, deeply, that poverty was a moral failing that could be corrected through discipline, education, and the Protestant work ethic. He had escaped poverty himself. Therefore, the formula must be replicable. The original charter was strict. Only boys. Only orphans. Only white. That last restriction would remain in place until 1968, when the U.S. courts forced the trust to desegregate. Milton was a product of his time. His utopia had borders. The boys were taken in as young as 4 years old. They lived not in dormitories, but in individual houses on campus, supervised by married couples who acted as house parents. Each house had 12 to 16 boys. They wore uniforms. They attended chapel every Sunday. They worked on the school's farm, learning agriculture and animal husbandry alongside their academic studies. This was the model. Take a child from nothing, strip away the chaos of poverty, replace it with order, routine, and practical skills. Output, productive citizens. Input, raw, human material. The language Milton used was the language of manufacturing, and it worked, mostly. By the 1930s, the school had several hundred students. By the 1950s, over 1,000. Today, enrollment exceeds 2,000. These children receive not just education, but total life support: housing, food, medical care, clothing, college tuition if they qualify. The trust spends approximately $100,000 per student per year. Do the math. That's $200 million annually just in operational expenses for the school. But here's where it gets complicated. The Milton Hershey School is governed by the Hershey Trust Company. The trust controls approximately 80% of the voting shares of the Hershey Company, the actual chocolate corporation. The trust board consists of roughly 17 members. These individuals wield extraordinary power. They manage billions. They decide who gets admitted to the school, who runs it, how the money gets spent. and they are accountable to no one except Milton Hershey's 1918 will. This structure creates a paradox. The school exists to serve orphans. But the orphans have no voice in how the trust operates. They are beneficiaries, not stakeholders. They cannot vote on the board. They cannot influence strategy. They are, in the most literal sense, objects of charity, not agents of their own fate. Milton designed it this way intentionally. He did not trust democracy when it came to money. He had seen his father squander everything on dreams. He had seen investors panic and sell during downturns. He wanted permanence. He got it. But permanence has a cost. Now we arrive at the strangest corporate structure in American capitalism. The Hershey Company, ticker symbol HSY, on the New York Stock Exchange, is a publicly traded corporation with annual revenues exceeding $9 billion. It employs roughly 18,000 people worldwide. It owns brands you know: Reese's, Kit Kat, Twizzlers, Jolly Rancher. It is the largest chocolate manufacturer in North America. But the Hershey Company is not a normal corporation. Roughly 80% of the voting control rests with the Hershey Trust. The remaining shares are publicly traded, yes, but those shares carry minimal voting power. This means that no matter how much stock you buy, you cannot control the company. The trust always wins. Wall Street hates this. Multiple attempts have been made over the decades to break this structure. In 2002, the trust board itself voted to explore selling the company. The price discussed was $12.5 billion. Kraft Foods was interested. Nestlé circled. The board argued that selling would unlock capital that could be used to fund more schools, expand the mission, serve more children. The town of Hershey, Pennsylvania, revolted. Workers threatened strikes. Alumni of the school protested. The state attorney general of Pennsylvania, who, by law, has oversight over charitable trusts in the state, filed legal action to block the sale. The political pressure became unbearable. The sale was canceled. Why did people care so much? Because the Hershey Company isn't just an employer. It's the town's identity. If the trust sold the company to an outside corporation, what would stop that corporation from closing the factories, moving production overseas, firing the workers? Nothing. The town would become another Rust Belt casualty. So the trust backed down. The company remained independent. But the crisis revealed a fundamental tension. Is the trust's primary duty to maximize financial returns so it can serve more children? Or is it to preserve Milton Hershey's specific vision, which included local employment, community stability, and the symbolic link between chocolate profits and orphan welfare? The law says the former. Sentiment says the latter. The trust is caught in between. This is the machinery grinding against itself. Let's talk about control from beyond the grave. Milton Hershey's will is not a simple document. It runs to dozens of pages, written in the dense legal language of early 20th century trusts and estates law. But its core mandate is clear. The trust exists to fund the school. The school exists to serve poor orphaned boys, now expanded to include girls and children from broken homes. Everything else is secondary. This creates what legal scholars call dead hand control. Milton, though dead since 1945, still dictates how billions of dollars are spent. His priorities override those of the living. His vision constrains the choices of people born decades after his death. Is this good? Depends who you ask. Supporters argue that Milton's structure has protected the mission from the short-term greed that destroys most charitable foundations. Look at what happens when billionaires die and leave their wealth to generic foundations. The mission drifts. Money gets siphoned into administrative overhead. The original intent is diluted into nothingness. Milton prevented that. His school still operates. His trust still funds it. The machine runs. Critics argue that dead hand control is inherently undemocratic and morally problematic. The world of 1918 is not the world of 2025. Orphanages as a model of child welfare are considered outdated by modern social work standards. The focus on agriculture and manual labor made sense in 1920. Does it make sense when most jobs require digital skills? Should a dead man's preferences override the living needs of actual children? There have been lawsuits. Lots of them. In 2016, former members of the Trust Board filed a lawsuit alleging that the Trust had strayed from Milton's intent, spending too much on non-school projects, including a for-profit medical center and lavish renovations to facilities used primarily by board members. The lawsuit was settled quietly. Details remain sealed. In 2020, the Pennsylvania Attorney General launched an investigation into the Trust's spending practices, questioning whether administrative costs had grown too large relative to actual student services. The investigation resulted in reforms, but no criminal charges. The pattern repeats. The Trust spends money. Someone questions it. Legal action follows. Settlement. Silence. Why the secrecy? Because transparency threatens control. If the public knew exactly how every dollar moved through the Trust, they might demand changes. They might demand accountability. They might demand that the children, the supposed beneficiaries, get a voice. Milton Hershey did not design his system for transparency. He designed it for perpetuity. Now let's step away from the billions and talk about the humans. A child admitted to the Milton Hershey School today enters a world unlike any other in American education. The campus sprawls across nearly 10,000 acres. It includes not just classrooms, but farms, a dairy, operation, recreational facilities, medical clinics, and those individual student homes where kids live with house parents. It is, in many ways, a self-contained society. Students describe it in conflicting terms. Some call it the best thing that ever happened to them. They arrived from homes marked by abuse, neglect, addiction, homelessness. Hershey gave them structure, safety, 3 meals a day, and a path to college. Many graduates go on to stable, middle-class lives. For them, the school delivered exactly what Milton promised: escape from poverty. Others describe it as stifling. The rules are rigid. The house parents have near total authority. Privacy is limited. The culture emphasizes conformity and obedience. Students cannot leave campus freely. Their contact with the outside world is controlled. For kids who came from chaotic but autonomous lives, the trade-off feels like imprisonment. And then there are the scandals. In 2011, the school expelled a 13-year-old student after discovering she was HIV positive. The school argued that her condition posed a health risk to other students. Disability rights groups sued, arguing this was illegal discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The school settled. The policy changed. In 2018, an investigation by the Philadelphia Inquirer revealed that the school had systematically underreported incidents of student-on-student violence and sexual abuse to avoid bad publicity. Alumni came forward describing assaults that were covered up, perpetrators who were quietly expelled rather than reported to police, victims who were told to keep silent. The Trust issued reforms. New oversight mechanisms, better reporting protocols, the usual corporate response. But here's the deeper question. Does the structure itself create these problems? When you concentrate vulnerable children in an isolated environment, managed by a board accountable only to a dead man's instructions, what checks exist? Who watches the watchers? The students can't vote out the board. Their parents, by definition, are either dead or incapable of caring for them. The state attorney general has oversight, but that office is stretched thin, monitoring thousands of charitable entities across Pennsylvania. The system Milton built assumed benevolence. It assumed that those in power would always act in the children's best interest. But power without accountability tends toward abuse. Not always, not inevitably, but often enough. Return now to Hershey, Pennsylvania. Population roughly 14,000. Median household income above the national average. Low crime, good schools. A tourist destination thanks to Hershey Park, which draws millions of visitors each year. On the surface, it's the utopia Milton intended. But dig deeper. The town is economically dependent on three entities: the Hershey Company, the Milton Hershey School, and Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, which operates the amusement park and related tourist infrastructure. All three are controlled, directly or indirectly, by the trust. This means the trust is effectively the town's landlord, employer, and government. It owns roughly 10,000 acres of land in and around Hershey. It decides what gets built, what gets demolished, who gets hired, who gets laid off. In 2012, the trust announced plans to close the local public golf course and convert the land into student housing for the school. Community members protested. They had used that golf course for decades. The trust owned the land, so legally it could do whatever it wanted. The golf course closed. In 2015, the trust demolished the historic Hershey Museum building to make way for a new visitor center. Preservationists objected. The building was tied to Milton's early life. Didn't matter. The trust owned it. The wrecking ball came. The pattern is clear. The trust operates with near absolute power within its domain. It listens to community input when convenient. It ignores it when not. Because at the end of the day, the trust answers to Milton's will, not to the people living in Hershey today. This creates resentment. Quiet, polite, central Pennsylvania resentment, but resentment nonetheless. People who work for the company or the school fear retaliation if they speak too loudly. Property owners near trust land worry that the next development plan will destroy their home values. Everyone smiles in public. Everyone complains in private. Milton wanted to build a model town. He succeeded. But model towns have a tendency to feel like theme parks: clean, orderly, controlled, and ultimately hollow. Here is the question that haunts the entire Hershey empire. Is this the best possible use of the capital? The trust currently manages an endowment valued at over $17 billion. That number fluctuates with the stock market, but it's consistently in that range. It is one of the wealthiest charitable trusts in the United States, larger than the endowments of most Ivy League universities. That $17 billion funds one school. Roughly 2,100 students. Simple division. The trust has approximately $8 million in assets per student. Now compare that to other models of serving at-risk youth. Nonprofit organizations that provide mentorship, tutoring, housing assistance, and college prep to disadvantaged kids typically spend $5,000 to $10,000 per student per year and serve tens of thousands of children. If the trust liquidated even a fraction of its holdings and distributed the capital to proven nonprofits nationwide, it could potentially help hundreds of thousands of children instead of 2,000. But it won't, because Milton's will says the money must fund his school, not schools. His school, singular, specific. This is the paradox of restricted philanthropy. Milton's genius was creating a structure that couldn't be looted or mismanaged into irrelevance. His tragedy was locking that structure into a single, specific model that may not be the most efficient way to achieve his stated goal of helping poor children. Legal scholars and philanthropic experts have debated this for years. Some argue the trust should petition the courts for cypress relief, a legal doctrine that allows the modification of a charitable trust's terms if circumstances have changed so much that the original mission is impossible or impractical. The trust could argue that modern child welfare is best served through distributed services, not centralized boarding schools. But the trust has never filed such a petition, because doing so would be admitting that Milton was wrong, that his vision is outdated, that the dead hand should let go, and the trust exists, fundamentally, to preserve the dead hand. Let's game out the future. The Hershey Company is not immortal. Chocolate consumption in the United States has been declining for years. Younger generations prefer different snacks. Health trends move away from sugar. Climate change threatens cacao production. Competitors innovate faster. What happens if the Hershey Company becomes unprofitable? If its stock price collapses? If the trust's $17 billion endowment shrinks to $8 billion, then $4 billion? The school would have to cut costs, fewer students, lower spending per student, eventually closure. Or the trust would finally be forced to sell the company, unlocking capital, but destroying the symbolic link between chocolate profits and orphan welfare that Milton considered sacred. This is not a hypothetical doomsday scenario. This is basic financial reality. No corporation lasts forever. Kodak, Sears, Blockbuster, giants fall. The Hershey Company may last another 100 years. Or it may not. Milton's structure assumes perpetuity. The market does not. The smart move, financially, would be to diversify. Sell the Hershey Company while it's still worth something. Invest the proceeds in a broad portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate. Insulate the endowment from the fate of a single corporation, but that would sever the link. The town would lose its identity. The students would no longer be Hershey kids, but generic charity cases funded by index funds. The magic, the myth, would evaporate. So the trust holds on and hopes the chocolate never dies. There's another layer to this story: the people who lived it. Alumni of the Milton Hershey School form a tight-knit community. Many return to Hershey for reunions. They donate money back to the school. They serve as mentors to current students. For them, the school is not an abstract policy debate. It is the place that saved their lives. But even among alumni, opinions fracture. Some worship Milton as a saint. They credit him with everything good in their lives. They defend the trust fiercely against any criticism. To them, questioning the school's model is personal betrayal. Others are deeply critical. They talk about trauma they endured while enrolled, about being separated from siblings, about being punished for normal adolescent behavior, about leaving the school at 18 with no family, no money, and no real preparation for independent life despite 12 years of education. One former student described it this way in a 2019 interview. Hershey gave me structure, but it also taught me that love is conditional, that you only matter if you follow the rules. That authority is never wrong. It took me years of therapy to unlearn that. Another said, "I'd be dead or in prison without Hershey. I don't care if it was perfect, it was better than the alternative." Both statements are true, simultaneously. This is the complexity that gets flattened in hagiographies. Milton Hershey was not a villain, but he was not a saint either. He was a traumatized man who tried to systematize salvation. He succeeded in creating something that helps many. He also created something that harms some. The machinery runs. The gears grind. Some children are lifted. Others are crushed. With tensions still unresolved, with the dead hand still gripping the wheel, steering a ship through waters Milton Hershey never imagined. The chocolate still tastes sweet. The factory still smokes. The school still operates. High Point still stands on the hill, watching over all of it, empty and full at the same time. And the question remains, is this what Milton wanted, or just what he created?